America's most trusted automaker just made a $4.5 billion mistake that could put 600,000 drivers' lives at risk, and the fallout is dragging General Motors to the brink. Behind closed doors, executives ignored internal alarms about a V8 engine defect so severe it can trigger sudden failure or fire, turning trucks and SUVs into potential time bombs. GM's promise of most dependable now hides a crisis of corporate greed, legal chaos, and families left with unsafe vehicles and no clear fix. As lawsuits soar and the cover-up unravels, how did an American legend sink this low? And what choices do you have if your car might explode without warning? The real story starts with the gap between what GM told us and what they desperately tried to hide. Walk into a GM showroom anytime in the last decade and you're surrounded by confidence. Trophy cases packed with JD Power plaques, banners for most dependable, longest lasting, and the ever-present Find New Roads slogan. These aren't just words, they're the soundtrack of American reliability, echoing from TV screens, billboards, and dealership floors. Chevrolet, GMC, Cadillac. Each brand with its own chorus of awards, each year another campaign. In 2015, the Silverado and Malibu wore their JD Power crowns in national commercials. By 2020, Find New Roads was everywhere, promising a future built on trust and innovation. The numbers back up the bravado, at least on paper. GM spent nearly $3.8 billion on advertising in 2020 alone. That's more than the annual budget of some small countries, all funneled into a single message. These trucks and SUVs are built to last. Every segment win gets its own commercial, every survey result a new press release. The 2015 Ipsos study, commissioned and quoted by GM, claimed Americans ranked Chevrolet among the top for reliability. No one asks how the questions were phrased or which models made the cut. The fine print stays buried. Awards are handed out by segment, so a truck can be best in a weak field and still win the title. It's like being crowned king when everyone else is limping off the field. When the trophies aren't enough, GM leans on slogans. Excellence for all. Most dependable. Longest lasting. These catchphrases echo through showrooms, but never mention the details. Model years, engine variants, or the badge on the hood that might cover a V8 with a secret. Find New Roads wasn't just a tagline, it was a shield. Every ad, every glossy brochure built a wall between the customer and the real story under the hood. While GM's marketing spend grew year after year, investment in quality control and engineering stayed flat. Analysts noticed, but the message drowned out the math. The promise was always front and center, and the reality stayed out of sight. The real question: what happens when the awards stop and the engines start to fail? Behind the glass doors and banners, a different story was taking shape. In the back bays of GM dealerships, service managers swapped stories nobody wanted to hear. Trucks rolling in with engine ticks at 8,000 miles. Brand new Escalades with a knock that wouldn't quit. Technicians started calling it the St. Catherine's Shuffle, another L87 V8 on a tow truck, another warranty claim logged. The official line stayed the same: routine maintenance, nothing to worry about. But in the shop, mechanics kept a mental list of which VINs to watch and which customers might be back sooner than they thought. Dealership inboxes filled with quiet advisories. Internal memos, stamped confidential, warned of heightened vigilance for rod-bearing noise and sudden power loss. The language was careful, always hedged. Monitor for unusual internal wear. Document all symptoms. The real message was clear to anyone who read between the lines. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just bad luck. One field tech in Michigan started keeping his own tally. By the end of 2022, he'd seen more engine replacements than in the previous 5 years combined. Meanwhile, the numbers behind the scenes didn't add up. GM's quality control spending stayed flat, even as production ramped up for the new generation of V8s. Plant maintenance requests piled up. Supplier quality audits flagged intermittent compliance, industry speak for corners being cut. But the budget for fixing those issues never seemed to grow. Mechanics noticed engines arriving with odd residue in the oil, or bearing surfaces that felt rough to the touch. Some started calling the new batch Friday engines, as if they'd been rushed out before a long weekend. Word traveled fast in the service world. Private Facebook groups and dealer forums lit up with stories of early failures and back-ordered parts. Some shops started warning regulars to keep an ear out for knocks or sudden warning lights. But on the showroom floor, the message stayed locked on awards and slogans. No one wanted to talk about the memo that urged techs to replace with updated spec oil, a fix that felt more like hope than engineering. The cracks in the facade were spreading, but only the people under the lift could see just how deep they ran. The numbers don't whisper, they scream. 28,102 complaints logged with the federal government. That's not a typo. That's more than the population of some small towns, each case a truck or SUV owner facing the same silent threat. 14,332 reports describe losing power, often at highway speed, engines going limp without warning. No dashboard light, no countdown, just a sudden drop in acceleration as traffic closes in behind. For 42 drivers, the problem didn't stop at the shoulder. Their vehicles caught fire. Some burned in driveways, others on the side of the interstate, a few in crowded parking lots. 12 people ended up injured, crashes, smoke inhalation, burns, because a bearing deep inside the V8 let go at the wrong moment. The government's own Office of Defects Investigation keeps a spreadsheet. Each row is a VIN, a date, a line or two describing the failure. Engine seized at 6,700 miles. Lost power merging onto I-75. Smoke from hood, total loss. The pattern repeats year after year across Silverado, Sierra, Escalade, Tahoe, Yukon. Some engines failed before the first oil change. Others died after months of flawless driving. Owners from Michigan to Texas, Maine to California, all sharing the same story in different words. Stack up the complaints and the scale becomes impossible to ignore. Nearly 600,000 vehicles covered by the official recall, but legal filings and ODI data suggest the real number could top 700,000 worldwide. That's nearly a quarter of all full-size GM trucks and SUVs sold in the last 4 years. Every one a potential time bomb. Every owner left to wonder if their next drive could end with a tow, a fire, or worse. The data isn't just a warning, it's a wake-up call. Dealers can't keep up with engine replacements. Rental car fleets are stretched thin as owners wait months for parts. Used values for affected trucks have dropped by as much as 30%, leaving families and businesses underwater on loans. The spreadsheet doesn't capture the frustration, the lost hours, the trust broken with every new entry. It only tallies the cost, line by line, as the damage spreads. April 2025. The doors of the U.S. District Court swing open and a new battle begins. Not over horsepower or towing capacity, but over billions in damages and the future of General Motors. At the front of the courtroom, lead plaintiff's attorney Sarah Mendoza stands behind a stack of repair receipts and owner affidavits. Her opening statement cuts through the silence. This is not a recall, it's a cover-up. These trucks are time bombs, and GM knew. On the docket, a class action complaint seeking more than $4.5 billion in damages. The numbers are staggering. Nearly 600,000 trucks and SUVs officially recalled, but court filings argue the true total is closer to 700,000. For every VIN on the list, another owner is left waiting, sometimes months, for a replacement engine that may never arrive. The repair backlog grows by the day. In April, some dealerships report wait lists stretching past 90 days. Rental fleets are tapped out. Families pile into borrowed cars or Uber to work. while their $70,000 Escalade or Silverado sits dead in a service bay. Mendoza calls her first witness, a small business owner from Ohio, who bought 3 2022 Sierras for his landscaping company. All 3 lost power within 18 months. One engine seized merging onto I-90, another failed in the driveway, spewing smoke. GM's fix? We'll call you when the parts come in. The business lost contracts and nearly went under. Multiply that story by thousands. Court records show more than 28,000 formal complaints, 14,000 involving sudden loss of power, and at least 42 fire incidents. 12 drivers ended up in the hospital. GM's defense team leans on the official line. The recall is comprehensive, defects are rare, and replacement engines meet the highest standards. But the plaintiff's attorneys produce internal documents, emails, defect tracking logs, and a spreadsheet from April 2025 showing over 8,000 engines on backorder nationwide. One memo, read aloud in court, warns, current repair rates unsustainable, liability exposure growing. The stakes are now measured in billions. If the class prevails, GM faces not just repair costs, but punitive damages, lost resale value, and a tidal wave of negative headlines. Mendoza closes with a line that echoes through the courtroom. GM chose profit over people. Now it's time to pay the price. The judge sets a trial schedule, and the legal clock starts ticking. For GM, the cost of cutting corners is no longer a line item. It's a threat to the company's survival. Inside GM, the alarms started quietly. One engineer in the powertrain division watched the incident logs stack up. Engines dying at speed, no warning, no limp mode, no check engine light. Each case was another Silverado or Escalade sidelined by a bearing that gave out with zero notice. In early 2023, a confidential memo began circulating among senior engineers and quality managers. The language pulled no punches. No warning before seizure. That meant exactly what it sounded like. The next time a family merged onto the interstate, the engine could lock up with no time to react. The memo outlined the cost of a real fix: full teardown, new bearings, tighter inspection, supplier audits. The price tag ran into the hundreds of millions, with no guarantee the problem would stay contained. Instead, the recommendation at the bottom of the page was simple: switch to a thicker oil, update the service sticker, and track failures as they came in. In the margins, someone had scribbled the math. $4,000 per engine, multiplied by hundreds of thousands of trucks, a liability that could swallow a year's profit. The engineer who raised the first red flag didn't get a handshake or a bonus. Within weeks, their name disappeared from key project meetings. Computer access was cut. The next assignment landed in a windowless office, far from the engine lab, with a stack of old warranty reports for company. HR called it a routine rotation. Colleagues called it exile. The message was clear: speak up and you're out. The memo wasn't the only smoking gun. Finance emails, later read aloud in court, weighed the cost of a recall against the odds of a catastrophic crash. One line stood out: most failures outside warranty window, exposure limited. The fix was never about making engines bulletproof. It was about buying time, hoping most trucks would cross 60,000 miles before the ticking started. The oil change was a band-aid, not a cure. By the time the memo leaked to class action attorneys, the damage was done. The stories of sudden engine death, lost power, and fire were already public record. But for the first time, the intent was in black and white. GM knew the risk, calculated the cost, and chose the cheaper path. For one engineer, it cost a career. For hundreds of thousands of owners, it cost trust, and sometimes much more. Crank open a failed L87 V8, and the evidence isn't subtle. Journal measurements from teardown reports show crankshafts running out of spec, sometimes by just a few thousandths of an inch, sometimes more. That gap is invisible to the naked eye, but for a bearing spinning at 6,000 RPM, It's the difference between a smooth ride and a death sentence. Supplier quality audits flagged these crank journals in batch after batch. The surface finish, meant to be mirror smooth, came out rough in places, with microscopic ridges that shredded the oil film meant to keep metal from touching metal. The problem didn't stop at the crank. Connecting rods arrived from the supplier with residue trapped inside the oil passages. Tiny grains of alumina, silicate, and steel fines left over from the machining process. Chemical analysis of failed engines found these particles embedded in the bearing shells, sometimes packed so densely they looked like sandpaper under a microscope. Every time the engine fired, those particles scored the bearings, digging deeper with each revolution. GM's own inspection records, later cited in supplier escalation memos, showed non-uniform surface readings across production runs. Tool wear, coolant lapses, and skipped cleaning cycles left some engines clean, others contaminated. The result? A game of Russian roulette, with some trucks making it 100,000 miles and others dying before the first oil change. The oil itself didn't help. Factory fill was 0W20, chosen for fuel economy, but thinner oil can't cushion a rough crank or flush out debris as well as a thicker grade. When engineers modeled oil film thickness in the lab, they found the margin for error was razor thin. Out-of-spec journals and dirty rods meant the hydrodynamic film could break down in minutes under load. Once the film failed, metal-to-metal contact took over, and the bearing's fate was sealed. Active fuel management and dynamic fuel management, GM's signature tech for squeezing out extra miles per gallon, only made things worse. AFM can leave oil galleries starved or stagnant during cylinder deactivation, letting debris settle right where it can do the most harm. Lifter failures upstream flooded the crankcase with even more metallic shavings, accelerating the wear cycle. Independent metallurgists, hired by class attorneys and insurance investigators, published micrographs showing copper-lead fatigue, spalling, and wedge-shaped scars in the bearing overlays. Spectroscopy picked up spikes of iron, aluminum, silicon, and calcium in the oil, each a fingerprint of machining shortcuts and missed cleaning steps. The evidence was overwhelming. This wasn't a freak defect or a bad batch. It was a flaw baked into the production process, multiplied by every corner cut at the plant and every shortcut taken at the supplier. No amount of thicker oil or extended maintenance could erase the damage once it started. The wear was cumulative, the contamination self-propagating. For every engine that spun a bearing at 7,000 miles, there were a dozen more quietly grinding themselves to death, waiting for their turn on the tow truck. The root cause wasn't just a faulty part, it was a system designed to fail, one shortcut at a time. Nearly 600,000 GM trucks and SUVs built from 2021 to 2024 are now under recall due to a 6.2-liter V8 engine defect linked to 42 fires, 12 injuries, and billions in losses. Internal memos confirmed that cost-saving measures overrode early warnings from engineers. Despite a $4.5 billion liability and ongoing class action lawsuits, key details about executive decisions and the full cost-benefit analysis remain sealed from the public. As of June 2024, GM faces federal investigations and repair waitlists stretching months, leaving thousands of vehicles on the road with unresolved risks. The evidence shows a direct line from declining quality control to real-world danger, challenging decades of carefully crafted trust. What still isn't known is how deep the prioritization of profit ran, or when, if ever, transparency will be complete. For now, the documented failures of the L87 V8 mark a turning point for GM, as the company's legacy is rewritten by choices made behind closed doors.